if we hold a high probability that the Bitcoin ecosystem and the people that describe themselves as Bitcoiners are a snapshot of the future, like the creativity that's about to be unleashed is mind-bendingly big. And so when we study parts of history such as the Renaissance, for example, of course that was heavily connected to a period of sound money when you actually start picking these bits apart. And equally, the rise of Rome before, obviously, then the fall of Rome. So what gets you really pumped about the next 5, 10, 15 years? And what is the right time frame to think about the adoption of Bitcoin for everyday people, but also just like those that are interested in entrepreneurship and creativity and going out and like building a vision? Because to me, it's very, very exciting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I think this is such a good question. And it's such a tough one to answer just because I think there's a lot of speculation as to what this world looks like. And I think that the challenge is that there's this famous saying in investing, which is the market can stay irrational for the longer than you can stay solvent. And I think that the challenge is that I think the fiat system is on its last legs, but it can go on for quite a bit longer than we think it can go on.
It can do more marathons than you think. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. It's going to have a few more kind of like adrenaline pumps and just kind of keep limping along. And so, but I think that what is really interesting is that when it comes to Bitcoin, when it comes to money, in my book, I touch on kind of like 4 main areas, which is kind of like relationships, kind of the parent-child bond, which we kind of touched on. We touched on the environment very, very briefly. I touch on politics and kind of governance, and then I touch on business. And so if I go over these very, very quickly, this is kind of what I think is profound about living on something such as the Bitcoin standard. So when it comes to the parenting, as purchasing power increases, parents are going to have more capacity. They're passing down much more knowledge. So I think we're going to have a much more cohesive, culturally relevant society, which is what we're losing right now. Now, what about like the environment? Well, I think it's really fascinating right now because our purchasing power is decreasing. We're incentivized to consume because our purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. Well, that's impacting our environment because naturally when we consume, that consumes resources. So it's impacting our waterways, it's impacting our forests, it's impacting kind of the minerals out of the ground, you name it. Well, the opposite is true on Bitcoin. If we're incentivized to save as opposed to consume because our purchasing power is growing, well, then all of a sudden we're going to have a society that is spending much more time looking inwards as opposed to looking outwards to try and meet their needs through consumption. Well, that's going to reduce the strain on our natural environment, our forests, our waterways, the minerals in our ground. So I think that we're going to start to see a healing or repairing of the damage that we're doing to our natural environment. That, I think, is just, to me, I think that is huge. And on top of that, I think we're going to see if less capital is going towards consumption, well, that means less dollars are going towards businesses that are creating crappy products. Well, if there's less dollars going towards these businesses, you increase competition, the quality of product rises. And with the quality of product rising, you're also going to see a boost in innovation. You're going to see a boost in creativity, as you're talking about. So I think that with less dollars going towards these businesses, anyone who's being fiscally irresponsible or creating products that don't really offer value, they're just going to wither away. We're going to see the companies that stay are the ones that are going to really be offering value, and they're able to think about their customers' needs from a different level. And then when it comes to kind of the governance and kind of the politics side of things, well, I think the challenge right now is that because the government has a money printer, it can operate and fund operations without support from the populace. Governments right now, taxation is not the only thing that's funding government. They're able to fund operations through quantitative easing and all of these other forms of kind of intervention. And so I think that if you're able to separate money and state, such as with Bitcoin, the government becomes a business just like any other business. And so the only way for it to thrive is to offer value to its populace. And so it switches the incentive. Instead of the government being able to operate without support from the populace, the government can only operate with support from the populace. So it has to create value. So I think that it changes our whole thoughts around governance and politics, where we create a value for value collaborative model. Because if it doesn't offer value, it's going to wither away because it's not obtaining capital. And then finally, on the business side of things, the challenge right now we see is that because the government is intervening monetarily and they're injecting capital into the economy anytime we have instability, it's creating this support for fiscal irresponsibility. If you're a company and you're being fiscally irresponsible and then you get bailed out, what does that tell you? It means you don't have to run those safety buffers of saving. You don't have to be able to think about the long-term prospects, because if you get in trouble, cool, you're just going to be bailed out. And so I think that we start to see a shift in incentives towards companies have to think long term, because if they don't think long term and something pops up that is unexpected, they're just going to have to wither away because they're fiscally irresponsible. And I think one thing that's really interesting is in today's world, and specifically during the pandemic, Canada wanted to intervene and support people that had kind of taken a big hit from the kind of loss of job or because of the pandemic. And so if you had lost 10% of your income or more, you were entitled to something called the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. And this was $2,000 a month. And so Canadians were given $24,000 a year if they'd lost more than 10% of their income. What does that do? It's a totally misaligned incentive because 30% of Canadians earn under that amount of money. So you've basically just said to 30% of Canadians, hey, do you want to go and work full time for your money, or do you just want to get given it for free from the government? So of course they take the latter option. And then you just saw this huge swath of the population just quit. And so all of these small businesses were no longer able to find low-income workers. And so whether it was bike shops, whether it was cafes, whether it was restaurants, all of these low-income workers, these mum and pop shops, they couldn't find workers and they went under. And so in the end, all of these big multinational corporations that could tap into a lot of these alternative funding methods, they were able to thrive, while all the small businesses withered away. And so I think that when you separate money from state, you realign the incentives towards value creation. Companies have to offer value, because if they don't, they wither away. And so you end up with a society that is creating so much more value. You have so much more cohesiveness and connection and collaboration and value creation. And so it really does impact our relationships, it impacts our environment, it impacts our business and politics, governance, you name it. I think it is profound what the future looks like under such a standard.
And hence, the biggest, I'll use a different phrase, the most important vote that you have is with your money. So if you're out there listening and you've just listened to Seb describe brilliantly like the different areas of our life that are going to change as a result of the adoption of sound money, then the best way to actually make that happen is to make changes. So if you own things that are still denominated in fiat, still controlled by the system that you grew up with, then you're still supporting it by keeping those things. And it's not until you decide to sell and move your economic energy, for another phrase, into the Bitcoin ecosystem, nothing's necessarily going to actually change, or it will just take longer. So going and voting at the polls for whatever politician is a complete waste of your time in comparison to what you might be able to do with your own asset allocation.